Thanks, everyone. My name's Marcus Strom. I'm the Federal President of MIA Media, which is Australia's professional association and union for journalists. Today, we're meeting across the country on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land, and MIA wishes to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, particularly at this time as we've just experienced some amazing demonstrations across the country in the big cities and in regional towns. It was great to see a big turnout in Wagga over the weekend as well. We're here today to talk about regional media and how it can get through this crisis and survive. MIA is committed to building a national coalition to ensure that newspapers and whatever comes after them survive and are the voices of their communities, so that communities continue to have conversations with themselves, so that people can keep in contact, and we can continue to keep the bastards honest as well. Unfortunately, since 2019, there have been more than 200 regional newspapers closed, according to PIGI, the Project for Public Interest Journalism Initiative. And just this year, News Corp announced 112 papers would no longer be published. 76 would go to digital only. The former Fairfax papers, now at ACM, are in a real limbo. I think it was about 90 of them were shut down for COVID, and we still don't know how many of them are going to reopen. Through this, we've had an announcement from the federal government of a public interest news gathering fund of $50 million. We're still not sure how that money is going to be spent. So we want to start a campaign where people in the communities can begin to call politicians to ensure that their regional papers survive. We've got a great panel here today. This is being recorded, just to let everybody know. There will be questions at the end. We've got Kevin Mack, who's the Mayor of Albury, who'll be joining us first. We also have Eliza Burledge from Horsham, who's a journalist. We have Robin Tennant-Wood, who's in Braidwood, as a former journalist, academic and community activist in that part of Australia. And Saffron Howden, who's a former Herald journalist. We used to work together at the Herald, and she went on to do amazing things to found Crinkling News and work on regional media initiatives through the Google News Initiative. There will be time for questions at the end. Do that through either the Q&A function at the bottom or raising your hand. If you virtually raise your hand, there should be a little button somewhere. That will allow me to bring you in off mute so you can physically give the question, or if it's in the Q&A, I can read it out. So I'll hand over now to Kevin. Thanks very much for joining us, everyone. Take it off mute, mate.
Mute. Did you mute me? That's restraint of trade, muting the Mayor of Albury. Now, look, just to give some background, I'm also the Deputy Chair of Regional Cities New South Wales and the Chair of the Riverina and Murray Joint Organisation. So I've had a fairly broad introduction to local government over the last 8 years, and I've been the Mayor here in Albury for the last 6. So I've taken a really keen interest in the medium that is called media, and as a failed candidate for Farrer at the last federal election, I'm also across what it means to be on the wrong end of the media. But having said all of that, I think we as a regional community have had one of the best local print media organisations in the Border Mail for a long time, nearly 100 years. And unfortunately, we're seeing the decline of that paper, and a decline which started when the Motts sold it to Fairfax and has continued since, and is now gone to a point where it's a daily newspaper putting out about 20 pages a day, where it was at its height, I think, at a circulation over 28,000 a day at its height. Now it's down to about 12,000 on a Saturday, which is their most popular day. So Look, one of the things I noticed as a regional mayor and as a person who grew up on a farm in Corrion, where they used to, the Corrion Courier was an old plate set. They used to set the print up, and he did that till about the 1990s, believe it or not. That's how that was augmented reality. But it was about getting the message out to the community, and people will pay money for information, and especially people in remote communities. And I think the sadness of the current dynamic is that there's two things. If the government was capable of providing a reliable internet or reliable digital platform, first thing. Second thing is some people can't, at a certain demographics, can't get used to that digital platform. They like the print media in their hand. There's a whole range of issues that associate themselves with regional media. And one of the things I find is the content. And with the advent of Fairfax, a lot of the content was AAP and national content, and it moved away from what its strengths were, which was community news. And believe it or not, local government in both sides of the border, we have two cities sitting on a border here, provide a high percentage of that news. So yeah, so I just find this whole situation, when Fairfax were talking about cutbacks 4 years ago, we stood as two mayors saying that it wasn't good enough to what they were doing, and it was, the writing was on the wall. And need I say with ACM, sorry, that I was commenting before that ACM are looking like they're wanting to do the same thing but reduce their footprint even more. So a lot of people are going to be out of work, and that's the sadness of this whole proposition. A lot of local people are not working, and the advertorial content is significantly reduced and has been for a number of months. So it's not just print media, it's electronic media, radio, television, all these things are diminishing. So I think it's a very strong case to say that Australia regional media is on the decline. How do we get it on the upslope? Because it's on the downslope at the moment.
Thanks, Kevin. Great food for thought there, and it's a good bridge to Eliza, who can talk about what it's like on the ground as a regional journalist when the ground is shifting so much. So take us away.
All right, am I off mute? Oh, good. Yeah, so I moved across to Horsham, which is in Western Victoria, about 3.5 hours west of Melbourne, in October last year. After a couple of years working in the press gallery with Michelle Grattan. I'd always wanted to be a regional reporter. I'm a city girl from Sydney, but regional reporting to me just looked like such an amazing opportunity to live and tell the stories of people around you. And as Kevin was saying, you know, especially when you're further away from the cities, stuff just doesn't get covered, like local government and courts, you know, only if it's a big case. So I saw it as a real privilege, rather than how it has sometimes been viewed as you go to a regional paper and then you move up to something like Ballarat or the Press Gallery or Melbourne. And that was instilled in me, especially from people like Gabrielle Chan, really talking about the importance of local media in terms of helping people make those bigger decisions, you know, when it comes to the federal election. So yeah, I was working for the Wimmera Mail Times. It's a pretty significant area we serve. There's about 18,000 people here in the city of Horsham. But bearing in mind, we're about 2.5 hours from any other big city, so your Warrnambool, your Ballarat, your Bendigo. So news from there is just not going to cover us and the issues we have. We're a hugely important area in the wheat belt as well. So at the moment, as Marcus has said, our paper has been, print was suspended in mid-April, and all of our staff were stood down and acting editors have been kind of syndicating stories. And in the interim, I had the brilliant opportunity to work for Michael Waite over in Narracourt, who started a brand new paper because the Narracourt Herald, which is another ACM paper, disappeared just like the Mail Times did in its print form. And as Kevin said, we've got, you know, a significant older community here. Some of them are more conservative. So print is actually still really viable and interesting to people here. And we've been creating a product that people are buying. We've been selling more than 2,000 papers a week at our distribution locations around Narracourt and surrounding towns. That's about 9,000 people that we might write to, and they're loving it. We're giving back 25 cents of each paper back into the community. And, you know, people are remarking on how those local stories are really good. And I guess I came here after working in the press gallery because when you're in the press gallery, you're right on the front line of where the decisions are made, but it makes you think, well, you know, how are those decisions actually affecting the average voters? And you lose touch with that. How might those big decisions affect somebody, you know, who's running a business on the main street and they're worried about their business becoming just another empty shop front? You know, how is that decision affecting a single mum who's, you know, raising 3 kids and now having to homeschool them? Those are the kind of stories that we can tell. And those stories get people talking and they actually build up community. And of course, you get the feedback as you walk around town, just, you know, like, not, and probably not as much as you would with the mayor, but people will tell you what you think, whether good or bad. But that shows they're passionate and engaged.
Thanks, Eliza. That's great insight into your experience there. And amid the sort of hard news and the difficult news, it shows there are shoots of interesting experiments and that communities will find a way to tell their stories. And if I now go to Robin, who's been working in Braidwood and can tell a story about what the community there's been doing in terms of both the decline and hopefully the rise of regional media.
Thanks, Marcus. Yes, Braidwood, for those who don't know it, is a little town of about 1,600, halfway between Canberra and the coast. We had one newspaper, the Braidwood Times. In fact, we still may have it. We don't know if it's coming back. It was one of the ACM papers that was closed down in April. They closed the Canberra Times, where it was printed, closed down half their print room because of their COVID restrictions, and the entire regional group of 5 newspapers was closed down. And the day after it closed down, I was the journalist on the Braidwood Times, so go back a bit, for 2018 and 19, and I actually retired last year so I could work on my own freelance projects. So the day after it closed down, a colleague of mine, a friend of mine who does desktop publishing, messaged me and said, well, we've got no newspaper, what do you reckon? Can you and I put one together? And so I sort of, well, let's give it a go. We got the local branch of the Bendigo Bank jumped on board. They bought a full page ad, which gave us enough money to sort of have it printed. We put the first issue together, 12 pages, went to press. We got a little bit of publicity via the local Facebook pages, word of mouth, which in a town of 1,600, you know, is probably your best way of getting info out. We've had 3 issues out. Issue 4 is being printed as I speak. It's 16 pages. We had more material for this issue than we can use. We've actually had to hold stories over. People like it. You know, people after the first issue, the inbox is bulging with people saying, hey, how can I get info in about, you know, what the footy team's doing, which actually isn't a lot at the moment. That's another story. The only sport in Braidwood that's actually being played at the moment is golf. That's it. Nothing else is being played. So the back page of the newspaper is actually the golf page. And I'm being accused of editorial bias because of the 30 people in Braidwood who are active golfers, I'm one. So, you know, I'm yeah, well, you know, you're just promoting the golf, aren't you? But I believe the football team is in training again. But yeah, people are sort of coming in. How do we get a story in about what we're in Eden Monero? We've got the by-election coming up. How do we get a story in about candidates? We want to know who's standing. 12 is the answer to that. One of our locals is running weekly, because we can't have an indoor meet the candidates session. We're doing politics in the park, so the candidates are being invited to come and you know, spruik in the park. So last week we had an independent candidate. I videoed that. It went live to Twitter. We then put that link onto the local Facebook page, and I've written that up for the paper. So we've got this sort of cross-pollination. But the point is, people want their news in print. They want to be able to pick up a newspaper and read it and then use the paper to, I don't know, wrap up the veggie scraps and put in the compost heap or something. But they want their news in print. And people have said, even people who are highly computer literate have said, we don't want to have to sit in the study next to the computer and read the news. We want to be able to pick up a newspaper, read it in the cafe, or, you know, sit with it over breakfast and read it. You know, it's important that they have that sort of that news in print, and there is definitely a future for it. Now, we're at the moment printing 400 copies. We're selling, I think, about 360, 370 of those. We're selling them to the local newsagent, the supermarket, and the 2 service stations in town are selling them. And, you know, people are commenting, people kind of value up in the street. I think, sort of, as Eliza said, they're quite happy to tell you what they think. And so far, it's all been very positive. But I think there's a trust factor involved as well. It comes down to personality. Because I was the local journo for 2 years, people already knew me and they trust me with their stories. My colleague, Paul, was a councillor on the old Pallarang Shire. He was deputy mayor for a term. People know him and they trust him. He was a very popular councillor. So I think it's that trust thing. You know, oh, well, Robin and Paul are doing the new paper. It was like, you know, well, we trust these people with our stories. And I think that's important. You know, your local journos become part of the community. It's like, you know, the local doctor and the principal of the local school. These are people, you know, the local sergeant of police. These are people you know, you recognise and you trust. And that sort of has been an important part. But we're at the point now, we don't know. It's all still in limbo. I've been in touch with the ACM staff, my former colleagues. They have no idea if they're coming back or not. Paul and I have made the decision that we'll continue. If the Braidwood Times comes back, if people still want to buy the changing, what we've called it the Braidwood's Changing Times, if people want to keep buying it, we'll continue doing it. If the Braidwood Times comes back and people start saying that again, we'll stop. It's employed. Neither of us wanted a full-time job out of this. I think we might have one. If the Braidwood, well, we've got to the point now where we have to make a decision. Do we either go weekly instead of fortnightly, or do we go fortnightly and make it bigger, go to 20 pages? So that's sort of something and I mean, it's likely we'll just put this out to the local community and say, what do you want? You know, and if they want weekly, you know, 12 to 16 pages weekly, we'll do that. If they want 20 to 24 pages fortnightly, we'll go that way. So I think there is definitely still a role for print newspaper, printed newspapers in country towns. It's a lifeblood. You know, funeral notices, death notices. You know, the absolute basics. You know, who's on the local tuck shop roster. These are the real basics of country town life that people need. So I'm all for it, and I support the regional media campaign 100%.
Thanks very much, Robin. That's really great insight. Something I tweeted a few days ago that my stepfather lived most of his adult life in regional New South Wales, and he died last year. And I put death notices in a number of local newspapers where he'd lived, and I got contact. I'm still getting contact. Just a couple of weeks, somebody he went to uni with had found it somehow and contacted me, and we had a lot of people, former students. He was a teacher up the North Coast, and he had students come to the funeral because of the notices. And I just do wonder about those things that will go missing if there isn't these regional and rural newspapers. So it raises questions about the future, of course, and what sort of models, and what you're talking about and what's happening at Narra Court and elsewhere. They sound like not-for-profit models, and marrying, what does the future look like? We've gone from where, I mean, MIA as a union has been warning that having 70% of newspapers owned by one company for so many years is dangerous for democracy. And with one switch, they've closed 112 of them, which has been very difficult for regional Australia. So what will emerge from that? And I'll come now to Saffron, and then after that, we'll go to questions. We've got a few questions beginning to come in, and do so on the Q&A function, or raise your hand virtually. So Saffron, what have you been seeing around the traps as you've in your role?
Thanks, Marcus, and hi everyone. I'm coming to you from Gunn in the Blue Mountains, west of Sydney, and I am in my Ugg boots. So I thought it was important that everyone knew that. Look, it's so heartening to hear Robin's and Eliza's stories, I've got to say. We've heard so many depressing tales about the media, the fate of the news media over the last few months in particular, and really over the last few years. And to hear those stories about the connections that local news creates, how important they are, the stories they cover, the community that they create around them. These are the reasons I'm passionate about regional and local media. And it's the reason why we all should be. When these publications and outlets close, it's the stories that aren't told. It's the person whose, whose life is not celebrated when they pass away. It's the under 11 netball team, as someone said in the comments, whose, grand final, under 10 netball team grand final is not covered. These stories are what make us human beings, and they're so important that someone that professional journalists can continue to cover them. I think we obviously have been the news media has been scratching its head for a long time about the future, and coronavirus has obviously really exacerbated problems that definitely pre-existed it. I think that we need to look at new models for news. I think if things like the bushfires this summer and coronavirus teach us nothing else, it's that journalism is an essential service. And we can't really leave that essential service to companies that are needing to make a profit for their shareholders. I mean, if there's a buck to be made out of it, I'm perfectly, I'm all for it. But if we're seeing that business model decline, we need to think much more innovatively about how we continue the essential service, even if the business behind it might not work anymore. I think not-for-profit model is one of those. I started a national newspaper for kids, but it was a very small operation. We ran it out of our spare bedroom in the Blue Mountains. The lack of support in the system, in the way that media is regulated and the laws surrounding it in Australia for small operations is phenomenal. There is just the system is set up for the large operators, and what we've seen during the pandemic is that when the large operators who've traditionally made money out of media, when their profits are threatened, the first thing they do is cut off their limbs to save the body. It makes sense in a business sense. I'm not criticising them for doing that from a business point of view, but the problem is it leads to this loss in local journalism. So we need to look at new ways to do it. We need to find ways. The government, society needs to find ways to support these new locally run independent media organisations help them to flourish, help them to stay there, to grow to 20 pages from 12, to become weekly or even daily from the fortnight that they are now. I don't think it's that hard to actually come up with some of these solutions. If you adjust your thinking and think this is essential to our community, you can find ways to support that service. And I think we absolutely must. We can't let regional and local news be one of those things that we only miss once it's gone. We've got to do something right now, and really we probably should have started some time ago, but given that we didn't, let's start right now, and I hope these conversations lead to those changes.
Thanks so much, Saffron. I was thinking about your sport coverage, Robin, and the fact that there's not much sport happening around. Of course, anyone who saw Australian Story the other week with Roy and HG, they were arguing that the less sport there is, the more there is to talk about in sports. So I don't know if that's an answer to your sports pages. I think what we're hearing really is, the old aphorism that politics is local, but obviously this has to have a lifeblood, the community lifeblood at the local level. We've got a few questions. The first one I think is from Suzanne Gervey. Sorry if I've mispronounced your name. Probably for Robin and Eliza. She's asking, how much are you selling the papers for? Are you breaking even or not? What's going on financially there?
We're selling the paper for $2, which people are quite happy to pay, and people have actually said to us, look, we'd be prepared to pay more. Paul and I are not going to be retiring to the Bahamas on the profits of this. You know, this is not going to make us rich. We are making a small profit. I think, you know, out of the first issue, we made about $230 each. Yay. But at the moment, we're looking at our biggest cost is printing, which we're getting done up at the school. They're doing a good deal for us, but that's still our biggest cost. We are actually looking at putting the profits from the last few issues into buying a reconditioned photocopier. Because we're close to Canberra and because the public service departments churn their office machinery over at a fast rate, we can pick up a fairly good photocopier. So we're looking at actually investing in some actual infrastructure ourselves, sort of some capital infrastructure. We've got more advertisements coming in. So I think advertising will end up being our main revenue stream. And so long as we're not actually having to pay to have the thing done ourselves, we're happy to keep it going. You know, I mean, it's a community service and it's very, very valuable. But yeah, possibly if we start going to 20 pages or 24 pages, we'll probably have to put it up to $3. But at the moment, $2 seems to be the going rate. People are quite happy to pay that.
And Eliza, and also there's a Catherine Bowd has put in a bit of a follow-up question to that. Do you know who's buying the papers? Is it older readers? What is it, a cross section as well as how much it is? Eliza, first.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we had so Michael Waite, who's our editor, underwrote the paper, as did Richard Peake, who's a former editor of the Narracourt Herald, and we also had a number of generous angel investors in the community. So that was really great to start off with. I'm getting paid as a contractor currently until I decide or move across permanently. There's a border in the way, which makes it a bit interesting. So we're selling our paper for $2 a copy. All our staff are getting paid. In the beginning, there were a lot of volunteers, but we actually hired part-time journalists the other day. So there's 2 part-time journalists. I'm a full-time journalist. We all get a salary. We've got an ad salesperson. The paper, as I said, sold for $2. 25 cents from each paper goes back into the community. And we have a number of revenue streams as well. It's, again, not trying to be at this stage for profit. Everyone's just getting paid money. There's no shareholders or anything like that. So we have advertising and sponsorship. So your normal ads, which are going really well so far, we're heading towards the target that we're wanting on that, which is looking really great. And we also have a more flexible model of advertising, which Michael knows far more about than I, but it's where you can be a bit more of a supporter and you buy that ad space but use it at your discretion at your time. And then we've also gone for a community radio model where instead of someone being a subscriber, they take out like an annual fee for their family and they get some stickers. And then that money, it ranges between $99 to I think $150. That helps, again, support the paper rather than just sort of subscribing, if that makes sense. So there's a few different streams at the moment. We're entirely print-based. But yeah, it's actually tracking much better than we thought, but we'll see how it goes.
And just quickly, Robin, before I've got a question for Kevin then, just who's reading the paper, who's buying it?
Pretty much the people who bought the Braidwood Times. You know, the core readership seems to be, you know, that they've just switched from the Braidwood Times, which is no longer in existence and may or may not come back, to the changing times. I don't have a demographic snap, but I can tell you that it's people who, from people with young families right through to elderly people. Braidwood has a fairly wide-ranging demographic because we're close to Canberra. We have a lot of people retire to Braidwood. It's close to Canberra, close to the coast. It's an ideal location. But a lot of very active arts community, and they tend to you know, like to have a newspaper. So it's basically just a transferred readership from one paper to the other. But yeah, it's not necessarily just old people who want the paper. It's young people as well.
For Australian film buffs, it's where The Year My Voice Broke was filmed. If I go to Kevin now, this question, what's at stake if you lose your paper? Coverage of courts, local government. I think there was a report a couple of years ago that showed 1/3 of all local governments no longer have the scrutiny of a local newspaper reporting on what happens on council. And if impacts are being felt in a place as large as Albury and Wodonga, what do you think it means for smaller places? So a bit of a double barrel question there from Neil. You're on mute, mate.
I think, again, that you mentioned the smaller councils. Regionally, Albury Wodonga sits in the middle of northeast Victoria and southern Riverina, and a lot of the smaller councils, the only medium they get news from, a lot of the smaller communities, is through their papers. So the Border Mail does have a significant footprint across northeast Victoria and the southern Riverina. In terms of local government, we all provide a level of advertising and commit funds to the Border Mail and other advertising mediums, but it's just that there's two things: the loss of income for the people working, the local community losing that connection with themselves. I mean, I noticed a question or a comment on the chat room about Facebook and Twitter and all those things. I mean, you can get a very jaded view of the world if you sit on a social networking platform 24/7, and there's a lot of people out there that do that and have a very jaded view of the world. But I think the Border Mail, as I said before at the start, has been a great newspaper and has had great journalists and still does. And I think the community of northeast Victoria and southern New South Wales rely upon, as a local government and as a community, good, accurate news reporting, and they like that paper in their hand. I agree with what Robin's saying, and Eliza and Saffron. They want to actually be able to sit in front of the fire or sit outside and read a paper. I mean, not to mention this, your eyes getting stigmatised looking at a screen all day, but it's just the print, the written word is far more powerful than anything you can get off a computer, I think. And again, as a local government, we would struggle to be able to provide news or information to our community which is balanced. I mean, I found in my term on council that what you hear and what you get are two totally different things at times. And when you actually get there and you understand the challenges associated with sharing information with the community, it's always good to have that the media sitting checking the checks and balances, so they ask the questions that need to be asked and certainly get the responses from the community. So it's always good to have that balanced reporting. And I think, again, it's like anything. It's like 3 tiers of government. They'll tell you what they want to hear, but local government is under more scrutiny than any level of government. And I think that's the balance of having local media and print media on and available, is that they hold you accountable to what you tell your community. And the community love their Border Mail, trust me. They love that paper. And I get what Robin's saying before. They just love it. And as I said, a lot of the journalists, and it was mentioned before, a lot of the journalists have gone on from electronic or the Border Mail into bigger papers right around the world. And to me, it's been a proven breeding ground for great journalism and great people. But you take that out of the equation, where does the next great journalist come from? I mean, does that become an influencer on Instagram or Twitter or Google or wherever it might be? With all relevance to Saffron, I know she's had some dabbling in Google, even though she can't find a brand new pair of Ugg boots. But I just really think you'll take away a valuable tool that holds all levels of government accountable, particularly local government, and the community accountable to the news and to listening and reading the spoken word. I think it's really important. I really do, and I'm very passionate about the Border Mail. I think I've had a lot of great relationships with the journalists over there, court reporters, sports reporters, and local government reporters, and they do a great job. And we just should not take away from that. And if it happens, if we lose that coverage from the Border Mail, there'll be significant knife going to the heart of our Albury Wodonga and regional communities.
Thanks, Kevin. Maybe if we start thinking about really what this campaign and the campaigns that we can link up with, what we begin to ask of government and of communities. And It's a question really from Lisa Waller. I think maybe Saffron might be well placed to begin this response. It's what role should platforms including Facebook and Google play in making regional and rural journalism sustainable? Thanks for your question, Lisa.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Obviously, I did do a teaching fellowship for Google News Initiative, where one of the reasons I got even more passionate than I had been about regional journalism was because I travelled around about 100 regional newsrooms in Australia and New Zealand, training journalists who work in news, and met some wonderful, dedicated, amazing reporters who, Kevin, and I just have to say this, were not just using their newsroom as a training ground, but might have been there for decades and wanted to be there because they believed that job was, they didn't need to go to the city to find out they were good journos. But
I hope you weren't wearing your Ugg boots.
I wasn't. But look, I think my personal view is that any company, anyone who makes money out of quality journalism should help pay for it. That's what I think. So, and obviously there's a role to play there in the platforms that, help distribute that content. If people go there to get that content, then the people benefiting that should help pay for it. But I also think we need to, if we're going to be successful in innovating and making sure that there is a future for regional and local journalism, we have to think beyond that. We have to pull together as an industry and most importantly as a community and start acknowledging, that this isn't just about, a business. Journalism is not just a business. It's been considered a business for so long. And really, when you run the Facebook, Google line, you've got to pay for it. You're really actually looking at the profits of some large corporations that have been affected. So I think you need them to come to the party, definitely. But I also think we need to look at journalism in different ways and look at different ways of funding it. That means making it, as has already been commented on in the comments, I think, making it a lot easier to set up not-for-profit journalism ventures and newsrooms. That's one thing. Secondly, I think, there's a lot of educating that journalists and the news media have to do with the general public about how important journalism is. I think, as journalists, we've taken our audience for granted for a long time. We need to tell them what journalists do, how they do it, and why it matters. And these campaigns are great for that, to make them understand that, the reason they have that bit of information is because a journalist somewhere was investigating it, was watching. People, I think, need to understand that if they can afford to pay for it, they need to pay for it as well. So I think there's lots of different approaches we need to take to ensuring that there is a future for journalism. I think getting the big tech companies to help pay for it is one part of that. But we've got to move beyond that if we're going to be successful and give journalism a future. It's got to include other things as well.
So we've got now the introduction of a mandatory code for Facebook and Google is going to be coming in. What we have been putting on the table is that money shouldn't just go to Nine and News to support their existing model. We need to find ways for that money, also the money from the public interest news gathering fund and other funds that the ACCC have recommended. Maybe if Kevin and Robin and Eliza can come in on this, how can we ensure and build a campaign both at a policy level but also at the grassroots level that we can generate action from the federal government? I mean, Kevin, how do you get the federal government to do things for you and around things like the community?
Yeah, look, Marcus, I put my hand up before when Saffron was talking, and this is a good segue into what you're saying. There's two things that come to mind about the Border Mail, which, as I said earlier today, has been one of the stronger regional papers in Australia. Two causes. One was was Headspace for Albury-Wodonga. The other one was the Albury-Wodonga Regional Cancer Centre. Now, if it wasn't for the platforms that were created by the then editors, Di Thomas and Julie Conn and the Anthony Barnes and the Johnsons and all those people that bought a mail, and Sophie's and the Tammys, who were in some cases awarded media awards for their coverage of those two major issues. They create national platforms from a regional paper. And to me, that is what the community will miss if we don't have regional representation at the table. As far as politicians are concerned, in my very short and limited experience, and there are better journalists sitting on this panel than me, marginality becomes a bigger issue. And if you were to look at all the marginal seats in Australia and target those seats and say to those ministers, if you want to maintain your position in the parliament, you need to do this, this and this. That's how you start, by creating opportunity in the big house. The thing about the marginal politicians, I'd hate to see a pattern of behaviour where a lot of the regionals that are being squashed are in those seats. Do you see where I'm coming from? It's like reverse gerrymandering. I mean, they won't have any regional coverage, so it doesn't matter. They'll just read what they see on Facebook or Twitter. But you've got to target those marginal seats and make sure you have an advocate sitting in the federal ministry who actually believes in what you're doing. And Mike McCormack might be that person, being a former journalist. I don't know. But at the end of the day, you've got to have a strategy that's very strong.
Thanks, Kevin. Maybe this is a good bridge for Eliza and Robin. Question to me on the text for Robin. How do we link the pockets of action that are where we've seen good outcomes, such as in Braidwood and Narracourt? How do we link that into a coordinated action campaign at the grassroots, linking in with what Kevin's talking about, maybe pressuring some of the Canberra politicians? Have you got thoughts on that?
Look, since I wrote an article last week that went to online with Independent Australia about what we've done here in Braidwood. And I've actually been contacted by a couple of journalists in other areas of New South Wales who are in exactly the same position. Their papers have been sort of pulled out from underneath them, either from ACM or News Corp, and they've actually contacted me and said, what do we do? How do we start it? What do I need? So I think it's happening at that grassroots level now. Just tapping into what Kevin said about the marginal seat. Of course, Eden Monero is your classic marginal, and we go to the polls here in 5 weeks' time. Now, Mike Kelly was our local member. He retired a couple of months ago. Mike was a great supporter of regional media. He was really good. I interviewed him for 2 different papers on several different occasions, tagged round behind him at the last election. He never refused an interview with any paper, and he was very, very generous with his time. So I hope whoever his successor is, and it's likely to be either the Liberal candidate Fiona Cotvoys or the Labor candidate Christy McBain. We're set to have our first female member for Eden Monero. I
think
do hope
it's a perfect opportunity. Hey?
Yeah. Look, absolutely.
Right.
And I mean, we've got a very good independent candidate in Karen Porter, who's been very active in the community, and she gave me quite a bit of time last week after the Politics in the Park session. So, yeah, I think this is definitely the opportunity to put pressure on those candidates, particularly obviously the Liberal and the Labor candidate, and say, right, we've lost all these newspapers. What can you do for us? And I mean, Mike, of course, was in opposition. If the Liberal candidate gets up, and she may well, who knows which way this is going to go, she'll be in government. So, she may be in a position to actually help us. If the Labor candidate gets up, she also might be able to put pressure on the government if they want to win this seat back. They're going to need to do something. So, yeah, I think it comes down to, I mean, it's sad because people in safe seats sort of shrug and go, what can I do? It's a safe seat, but yeah, if you're in a marginal seat, use that as leverage. Absolutely.
Eliza, what's the relationship between small businesses? You mentioned before about worries on the main street, and how policy from Canberra affects real lives in regional towns. So how can we as journalists reach out to those people to make sure this campaign is broad? It's not just a journalist campaign. It's not even just a media campaign. This is a broad community campaign. What do you think might work there from what you're seeing?
Media's done some really great campaigns to try to appeal to people whose interests should align with what you're saying, but they don't always think that they should be active. A great example of that would be, I think it was the election before last, following Brandis's arts cuts. There were lots of flyers put into the foyers of theatres around the country. And I remember going to a Sydney show, it might have been at Darlinghurst Theatre Company. And at the end of the show, the actors told the theatre audience, hey, if you really liked what you saw tonight and you love the arts, why don't you, think about how you're voting and what that might mean for the arts. So I think there are opportunities like that to leverage the support of businesses by saying, hey, look what journalism has done for you, whether it's telling the story about how your business has bounced back after being shut down for 10 weeks during the pandemic, or whether it's that we ran that ad that helped you find that great applicant for your job. I think there are ways that we could be putting out flyers as well as maybe having discussions and sending that information out to those businesses, because they are our allies, and the journalism, it does matter to them, if that makes sense, but it's just finding the way to have those discussions in a way that, talks to them, like we did with theatre.
I've got a question from, I'm not sure what it's about, but I'm going to roll the dice. Graham Davis wants to speak. I'm going to let him speak. Just ask a question, Graham. Don't make a speech, mate. If you take it off mute. Not sure what your question is, but no, he's not there. Oh, there we go.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4.
You're in.
Okay. Worked for the Sun for 32 years, then for the St George Leader, made redundant by both, and I feel for the kids who are going to be made redundant. So here's what I'd like for you all to do. Look for alternatives for the regionals and suburbans that have been closed down. Earlier this week, I flew a very, very big kite. I wrote to the Redlands City Bulletin, which is an ACM paper about 30 kilometres from me. It still does a print version. I suggested that paper or ACM buy out the Quest papers in my area at Redcliffe, which is north of Brisbane. We've lost basically everything. I will be following this up also by going to a little A5 magazine we have in Redcliffe called the Redcliffe Guide. Yes, it only comes out once a month, but could it be expanded to a tabloid and perhaps get published every 2 weeks? These are ideas which we might expand upon.
Thanks, Graham. I think it shows there's going to be a lot of experimenting in this process. We're coming towards the end. It's gone very quickly. I think what we want to come out of this is activity and a coalition. We want to make sure this is a non-partisan campaign. We would love the Deputy Prime Minister to get behind what we're trying to achieve here. This is definitely not a partisan campaign. This is about supporting community, no matter who you vote for. And I really want to get in everyone behind this. So I'm going to see if there are any last comments from people around models. I see Saffron's got a hand up, so let's go straight to Saffron.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I really loved Eliza's idea. I think it feeds into what I was saying about, journalists and the news media needing to get out there, and regional journalists do this anyway. But more generally, I think our industry needs to be closer to its community, and to help people understand what it is that journalists do and why it's so important. I think there are a couple of other things. I think that the philanthropic space has really opened up in Australia in the last few years, certainly more so than when we launched Crinkling News. And a lot has happened in that space since then. And I think, there's a lot more interest from people who just believe in the democratic value of local and regional news, who would like to see it flourish. I think that's something that we should work on. I also think that, the bodies like Mia, who are doing a great job like this, but also the Walkleys, can really elevate the voices of of regional and local news. Having better representation of them on the Walkley board and among the awards, making sure that we realise that, the big scoops aren't always by Four Corners and Kate McClymont, fantastic journalists, but there are the ones that plug away at the Ballarat Courier and expose, the treatment of the situation in local jails, and making sure that we really elevate those stories and give them the attention they deserve. And I think a lot of things will flow from that. And of course, I think, the government can pitch in a lot more here. I think, $50 million as a sort of, almost bailout package is not enough. And I think, talked about sort of targeting particular people. I think there was a question on the chat about where are the Nationals on this. I would love to hear more from the Nationals on this. I mean, these are their, we're talking about communities that are broadly meant to be the Nationals constituents. I would love to see every one of them asked what they think of this and what they're personally doing to help ensure that regional journalism thrives and survives. And that goes for any politician representing anyone in the bush. I think there's a lot more we can do, and obviously we can do that a lot better if we're together. And I congratulate Mia for doing this campaign, and thank you very much for having me involved. And I'll shut up so that other people can have their say before we end.
Some final words from the panellists before we finish. Anyone else?
Just one, Marcus. Happy to bring this to the agenda of our regional cities and my regional councils here in the Murray River region, so that if you did come out with any any paraphernalia that would support Mia and support regional journalism, they would probably happily provide a platform for that to be distributed, or a message to be distributed. I think that's really the start of that political journey. And I'm with Robin. She's got a great opportunity over there in Braidwood. It's the little things that hurt, because there's 12 candidates there, and get them on board, Robin.
Thanks, Kevin. You got any last words there, Robin, before I finish up? And Eliza, Robin, yep.
No, just I think definitely get the political parties on board, and it doesn't matter which political party. It's in their best interests. It's in all the parties' best interests to get on board with regional media, because there are a lot of people out in the country. Increasingly, people are the sea changes and the tree changes, and people are flooding into our towns. Braidwood is growing, and also, things like, Braidwood is a community that's, we've been in limbo out here since last November, which is when the fire started out here. And we were sort of under threat from fire, direct threat from fire. And there's still a lot of people around here who are living in caravans and tents, sort of several months later. That was until February. Then the rain came. Put the fires out just in time for us all to go into COVID lockdown. So this community has really been relying 100% on their local media to tell them what's going on locally. So we have a weekly Zoom meeting with the local council bushfire recovery team. The only way that the council's bushfire recovery team, which is based in Queanbeyan, can get information out to its local community is via local media. So it's more than just sort of for interest's sake. It's absolute lifeblood stuff. So that's certainly something we'll be hammering the Eden Monero by-election candidates on.
Thanks. And Eliza, in a minute.
Well, we had about 5 papers either sort of be various types of shuttered over in the Mallee, which is Anne Webster's electorate. She gave a cake to the Sunraysia Daily and wrote an op-ed in one of the new papers, but we're yet to hear much more. We we're getting quite a bit of support here in Narracourt from Tony Passon, but absolutely, we should absolutely get those politicians to the table because the community loves it. But yeah, we definitely could do more to make sure that they vocalise that, even at a local government level. We've had some reluctance from the mayor to celebrate the fact that we've started something up new. And that's really important, because we've all got to work together because it benefits everybody.
Thanks, Eliza. Well, I don't know about everybody else, but, you know, I'm feeling a lot of optimism now after this hour, and a lot of energy. And it's now a question of focusing it and making sure our networks build and stay strong and we start getting some results. So things we want you to do: subscribe to your local paper if you've got one. Write to your MP about how the PING money, the public interest news gathering money, is spent. Write to the Parliament about, and your MP about, how the mandatory code money should be spent to support regional journalism. If you're a journalist in a regional area, we've got a meeting for journalists at 5:30. I think it's tomorrow, and you can contact me through the website. I'm media.president@mea.org. And also, if you want to stay involved with what the campaign is doing, if you look in the chat right now, there's mea.org/our-stories-matter, where we will be able to keep you up to date. So there's a lot of options for us, a lot of energy, and it's now about a question of making our politicians respond to the needs of our communities. And sounds like there's a lot of energy to get some results. So thanks everyone for joining today, and we look forward to working with you through this campaign. Thanks for attending.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marcus.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Keep the fire.
Thanks,
keep the
Saffron.
fight.
Thanks, Liza.
Yes, all
Thanks,
the best.
Robin.